Hello and welcome to the 105. I'm Cooper Patagna. That is Bud Elliott, co-host of the Cover 3 podcast. You're probably wondering where Andrew Ivins is today. Well, he's busy because he is a dad, and I am glad to report that we have a healthy baby here at the 105. So it's going to be guys like Bud, guys like Tom Loy, pitch hitting. But Bud, the good thing here is, man, the college football calendar is just absolutely relentless. The transfer portal is humming at an all-time high, and there is no shortage of things to talk about. And we got some news this morning. John Mateer, the new number one player, according to 24/7 Sports, in the transfer portal from Washington State. In another year, another quarterback from Wazoo in the transfer portal. And Bud, a lot of buzz here. Oklahoma, Ben Arbuckle, new offensive coordinator there in Norman for Brent Venables. Obviously, that seems like the leader in the clubhouse and the clear favorite here. But talking to Matt Zenitz, insider at 24/7 Sports and CBS Sports, seems like there are going to be a lot of other teams sniffing around here. But, Bud, just your instant reaction to John Mateer, one of those big quarterbacks jumping in the portal.
Coop, I agree with you, man. I think he is by far the most proven commodity who so far has entered the portal at the quarterback position. We were talking pre-show, how many guys out there have really that proven production that I think you'd want if you want to go spend that big time money on a quarterback? Maybe there's a few out there who we've all heard the rumors about. Maybe they got some NFL draft decisions to weigh. But I think Mateer is a really interesting prospect because he does bring enough with his arm, and he brings a lot with his legs. In fact, he was on my college football championship fantasy team where I beat Chip Patterson in the final of the Cover 3 podcast. And Mateer's legs are a big reason why. Like, he can really scoot. I think he brings a kind of multidimensional factor to an offense. You see the stats here on the screen, 29-7 touchdown interception. Kind of fell off at the end of the season, but ultimately a lot of that team, I don't really know exactly why that was. If I'm kind of kicking the tires and figuring out if I'm going to pay that big time money for a quarterback, I do kind of want to figure like, hey, why did the numbers drop off a little bit towards the tail end of the season? But Mateer would make a lot of sense for Oklahoma, especially if they're not able to fully fix that offensive line in just one off season. I mean, Miami had a lot of success with a quarterback from this exact system as well. So we'll see how it goes.
He was a really interesting case study when it came to like the portal rankings and ratings. And we get a lot of questions. How do you balance the projection with production? And, we have a little bit of a formula that we use, an algorithm that our friend Derek Chang at 24/7 Sports has put together. But on top of it, the subjective evaluation is the piece that is weighed the heaviest. And when you look at Mateer, I mean, you go down the line of quarterbacks, Bud, and you look at some of these guys, Mendoza from Cal, you look at Miller Moss from USC, now at Louisville, you look at guys like Jackson Arnold that we're going to talk about here in a minute. Outside of Mendoza, it seems like there's only really one or two high floor win now quarterbacks. Mateer enters that conversation. And the other thing that you mentioned, man, I like him as a passer. I love him as a runner. I think that's the element of his game that he brings. He rushed for 15 touchdowns, over 800 yards, had 3,000 yards through the air as well. So this is a multi-dimensional dude. The reason that we have him as number one in the portal, you go back like revisionist history. If we could all do this again, we'd probably put Cam Ward number one in the portal because of the impact that he had on that team. But I'm interested to ask you, you talked about it, Oklahoma, whole new offensive line this past year. We saw how that worked out for Jackson Arnold, new offensive coordinator going into this year, if it does end up being Mateer. But they are decimated at receiver. Like, what do you think about this potential marriage situation that Mateer would go into for a 6-6 team like Oklahoma that needs to win in 2025?
Coop, I'm glad you brought up the legs again, because I think that's probably going to have to be a big part of this. What are the odds that you go out and you're able to scoop 2 or 3 really good receivers in the portal if you're Oklahoma? That's probably what they will have to do if they want to have an elite passing game. So it probably makes more sense to moneyball this approach a little bit. Hey, we're going to go a little more QB run, a little more run heavy. I do like the Oklahoma tight ends quite a bit. So maybe you get those guys involved a little more, smash mouth, if you will. That's really not Mateer's game. Like, he's not running guys over all the time. He can scoot a little bit. But I think you kind of have to understand like the market dynamics, like how many real stud receivers are out there, and can you go get 2 or 3 of them, and at what cost? So if you go get a guy like Mateer, that kind of alleviates that a little bit. It also probably opens up the ability for you to get different types of offensive linemen in who can actually come and help, because those elite pass protectors, they're not going to come cheap, and sometimes they don't come at all. Like, we don't always have big time pass protectors in the portal every year.
Well, I'll say this, studying the portal this year, I mean, you look at guys like Isaiah World coming out of Nevada, what Auburn was able to bring in with the tackle from Virginia Tech, another one this morning that you and I were talking about out of Minnesota. These guys aren't perfect, but they're big functional athletes. And you see the value that teams are putting on these guys. The other thing that I will mention, the receiver position is the deepest room in the entire portal, which makes me think if I'm Oklahoma, Brent Venables, I'm trying to get a public declaration from John Mateer as soon as possible, because it almost makes the rest of the board more obtainable in terms of what you can do in terms of timeline. So one domino that we are waiting on is John Mateer, the new number one player in the 24/7 Sports transfer portal. Guys, make sure to keep it locked to 24/7 Sports right now. Matt Zenitz, Chris Hummer, those guys doing a phenomenal job. Bud, the quarterbacks, they drive the show, so let's stay there. Jackson Arnold to Auburn, the former five-star. Talk about an up and down couple years here for the former Sooner. He's going to Auburn with Hugh Freeze. I thought this was fascinating because you and I just talked about Mateer. We talked about Mendoza. I was really, really curious what Auburn was going to do at quarterback in a must-win year in 2025 for Hugh Freeze. But to me, this feels like a little bit more of a calculated roll of the dice where the payout, yeah, it seems high, but the floor here could be more similar to what we saw this season with Auburn.
I mean, Coop, it's supply and demand, and Auburn definitely controls the demand. They have a demand for a big-time quarterback, and they have spent at the high school level quite well over the last few years. Now, this is kind of the year they're like, hey, it's really time to gas this thing up. Let's supplement it with the transfer portal. We didn't spend big time last year on Peyton Thorne. Let's go ahead and bring in a big-time quarterback. But you look around, and we just talked about Mateer. Like, if Mateer's your one, I think Mateer is a nice player. He's a player I think Oklahoma would be thrilled to have. I think Auburn would be thrilled to have if they got him. But ultimately, he's not on that Cam Ward level for me, right? I don't think he's really even on that Dylan Gabriel level. So if you're Auburn, it's like, yeah, okay, got the money to spend. Let's splash the pot. But the players also have to be in the portal and available. And so far this year at the quarterback position, I don't know that you see a ton of crazy difference makers. And you really have to focus, I think, on fit and on upside. And Arnold is a pretty good athlete. I know Hugh Freeze has talked about how he throws the deep ball exceptionally well. And he also mentioned the RPO game, which I think is important here because our friend Cole Kublik, talks a lot, but he's done a lot of Oklahoma games this year over on ESPN. And he's like, look, man, once he gets off that first read stuff, it's really kind of bad for Arnold. But within structure, first read, or then go use the legs, it's not too bad. So if you can build upon that, that actually sounds to me a lot like what Hugh Freeze wants to do in that offense. So I kind of like the fit, even if I don't think that the player is perfect yet.
444 yards rushing. You know what's interesting? I've said this before, talking to Andrew Ivins about this. All the things that we liked about Jackson Arnold coming out of Denton Guyer, a guy playing a high level of competition in Texas. You talk about the poise, you talk about the accuracy, the ball placement, the internal clock. We have not seen it. I think the other thing that's important to note here, all those things that we mentioned about John Mateer and why the fit might be a little bit scary, not so much schematically, but from a personnel standpoint. Can you protect this guy? Can you put the playmakers around him as well? And do you have the play caller, right? And I think at Auburn, he walks into a better situation. Got guys like Cam Coleman, Malcolm Simmons, what they're doing there as well. They got some guys that they bring in. Darrell Robinson, Xavier Chaplin was the name that was evading me earlier, the big offensive tackle. But I'm just curious to ask, I mean, if this were you and maybe not having intimate knowledge of the board, would you have gone this direction with Jackson Arnold if you were Hugh Freeze, or would you have taken a bigger swing on a guy like a Mateer or Mendoza? Obviously, the timeline, this one playing out a little bit later with Mateer jumping in the portal just today. But do you think it behooves Auburn to have been as aggressive with Jackson Arnold as they were?
Right, there's a couple things going on here. A, is Auburn going to take multiple swings? Because I know we talked about this today on Cover 3, and all the Auburn fans in the chat were like, hey, we're signing 2. And granted, I don't know if we should cite the YouTube chat section, but that appears to be sort of the feel from some Auburn folks that they may end up taking 2 quarterbacks and may the best man win. Interestingly, they saw Mendoza this year. He beat them in Auburn. So they should be intimately familiar with his game. He kind of an up and down season, but definitely made some nice throws this year. And I thought played pretty well. There's also kind of the game of chicken going on. Are you going to wait out Ewers? Are you going to wait out Milroe? And can you afford to do that? I think those are probably the 2 guys who have NFL decisions to make. Is Ewers going to turn pro? Is Milroe going to turn pro? And if not, are they going to stay at their current schools? That it's really kind of a fascinating situation. But I think Like, could Auburn be sneaky genius here by signing Arnold and somebody else, paying them both, having them come compete? I don't know.
Yeah, kind of interesting. You kind of look at the model Pittsburgh Steelers, Russell Wilson, Justin Fields. Can you do that at the collegiate level? Ashton Daniels has been the other name that they've been attached to from Stanford. Bo Prabula, to me, I think is another beautiful fit. If I was Auburn, that would be one that I'd be kicking the tires on as well. Guys, stick around. We got an interview with one of the best players in the portal coming up next. Welcome back to the 105. We are now joined by one of the most popular players in all the transfer portal. That is former FIU receiver standout Eric Rivers, who is a busy man. So we appreciate you taking some time for us, Eric. Eric, you've already taken visits to Miami. You're in Omaha, Nebraska right now. You got some visits coming up as well. Georgia Tech, Penn State, Colorado. You entered the transfer portal on December 1st. The portal is crazy, man, especially from the fan point of view. Just tell me what these last 2.5 weeks have been like for you as you and your family navigate this process.
Yeah, it's been a crazy process from the start of it. I mean, taking phone calls every day from 6:30 in the morning all the way 12:30, 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes, like every day nonstop. So it's like constant grind to try to figure out where I'm going to be at this next year of my career. So it's just like full on, hands on, complete busy. So
Eric, how different is this experience now as you're one of the top guys in the transfer portal among the available players compared to what it was for you as a high school recruit?
For me, coming out of high school, it was during COVID time. So I didn't get to take none of these visits or do any of this part of the recruiting process because I came out during COVID. So this is all new to me. So you got to adapt quick. So college football has been changing a lot. So I think just having the ability to learn how to adapt to change has been good for me in this moment, and just learning how to take everything day by day and don't kind of rush the process, but embrace it at the same time, since I never got the opportunity to have this process coming out of high school.
Eric, the questions for you as a player, I mean, you think about weighing all these things, financial implications, playing time, the right fit. What does it look like in terms of player development, you and your career and how it relates to Sundays? What are some of the most important questions for you as you visit some of these top programs from around the country?
Yeah, my biggest thing is just find a scheme that fits me as a player, because I only got 1 year left of eligibility. So for me, my biggest thing is making sure this last year of college football that I got to make the best of it and put myself in a position where we can be successful as a whole, as an offense and stuff. So I got to figure out what school is going to put me in that position, what offensive coordinators and do a good job with players like me and stuff. So that's kind of my approach to the situation, and just kind of taking it day by day and just assessing that, because things change and quarterbacks changing with the portal. New quarterbacks going in, quarterbacks coming to different schools. So everything's a lot. And as a receiver, we need those quarterbacks, O-line, and all that thing. So all that plays a part in it.
Eric, how important is quarterback to you? And obviously, you visited Nebraska. You're on the way to see Georgia Tech. We know who plays quarterback for those schools. Do you have any indication of who might be the next signal caller for Miami as they're in the mix for you as well?
Yeah, I kind of just waiting to see how that kind of plays out. So I gotta I don't have 3 or 4 years to kind of sit and wait and figure out what's gonna be what. I only got 1 year, so with me, I think I gotta make my decision. Like, I gotta know what I'm going into before I can't go into nothing blindly, really.
Eric, you talked about scheme a little bit earlier. What I find interesting for you and your size, you operate a lot on the outside. You had over 550 snaps operating on the perimeter versus just over 60 on the slot. Tell me about your comfort level operating on the inside, and have teams talk to you about that.
Yeah. I mean, I played both positions like throughout my career playing college football. So I'm kind of comfortable inside or outside. I feel like there's a guy lined up in front of you on the outside, there's a guy lined up in front of you on the inside. So I just trust my skill set and go out there, whether it's inside or out, really.
All right, Eric, for fans at home who may not be sickos, they're not watching a lot of FIU, describe your game. Like who's an NFL guy that you would remind them of?
I say kind of, you said who I compare myself to?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't like to compare myself to nobody. I may take bits and parts of other people's game, but for myself, I think I'm kind of fast top end guy, but a twitchy guy at the same time. So Really, I've got the shiftiness of a slot receiver, speed of an outside receiver. So really, that's why I can inside or outside.
Eric, man, we appreciate you spending the time with us as always, and fly safe, man. I know you got a busy schedule coming up.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right, man. Take care. Eric Rivers there,
All right,
one of the top players in the transfer portal. And, but I mean, it's just fascinating to kind of think, you know, all these guys, what I was thinking about, and he was talking about obviously having a covert recruitment out of high school, but how different it is to be recruited at the college level versus how different it is to be recruited coming out of high school. And when you think about Eric Rivers, you know, he committed to Memphis out of high school, found his way to FIU, was kind of a lowly recruited guy, low 3-star guy for him. But man, one of the more dynamic players in the transfer portal. I love that question, by the way. You talked about Miami. I thought he was going to be able to give us the goods there.
Yeah, I mean, well, look, if quarterback's important, he noted you only have 1 year. You know, does Miami like somebody who's currently on their roster? Or more importantly, do they love somebody who's currently on their roster? Or are they going to look to maybe hit the transfer portal and see what they can find there at the QB position?
Yeah, definitely good insight from Eric Rivers, as at this point, you can possibly imagine with everything going on in the transfer portal, a lot more transactional than the traditional recruitments that we've seen in college football in years past. Guys, stick around. Got some Bill Belichick ceilings and floors we're going to talk about next with North Carolina.
Speak to me about how it will be different from what you did as a player personnel person and a GM in the NFL to what you will do as this new GM position in Division I college football.
Not much, Mike. I think we're going to build a pro personnel department, and that pro personnel department really will be the transfer portal. So that will be what we build there to monitor all the college teams, whether it's in the ACC, the Big Ten, the Southeast Conference, or in any conference, right? The new Pac-12. So you have to monitor all the players just like you would in pro football. And then obviously you'll have a director of college scouting, but that guy will be the director of high school scouting and monitor all the high schools. North Carolina has a great fan base. They have a tremendous recruiting area in the Tidewater area in Virginia. They haven't been into Florida as much in recent years, but there has been a time where they were very good in that state. So we're going to try to expand it to a national program, which it should be.
All right, bud, I'm sure you have gotten a lot of questions about Bill Belichick, what it's going to look like for a guy that won 6 Super Bowls at 72 years old, getting into the college game for the first time. What you just heard there was his new general manager at North Carolina, Michael Lombardi. And what I know for sure, but in my mind, I don't know what the on-field product is going to look like, but I think Bill Belichick and Michael Lombardi are going to change the game of college football forever. That is my biggest takeaway. And you heard it there in that interview, and I wanted to lead with that, is because these guys have seen it done at the highest level, and they're going to take that approach, and they are going to bend the college game to their will in terms of the infrastructure and what it looks like. And there are a lot of probably people out there listening saying, well, aren't there the equivalent of pro departments and collegiate departments out there? Yes. What I mean by this is I think these two are going to take it further than it's ever been before. What does that look like? We talked about cap analysts in the past. We talked about potentially area scouts. I think these are going to be things where they're going to challenge the NCAA and the bandwidth, just how far they want to go with this. I am super, super fascinated to see what North Carolina is going to look like really from an infrastructure standpoint, because it would only take somebody like Bill Belichick or Michael Lombardi to come from the NFL and say, hey, listen, this is the way that it's been done at the highest level. Why wouldn't we do that here? And until a couple days ago, you have never had that. Sure, you've had coaches in the NFL, but the way that these two are intertwined. But my biggest takeaway is, I think from a pure infrastructure standpoint to what we'll see in college football for years to come, yes, the game has gravitated naturally to general managers. The credibility, the equity that these two add to the operation, just from a collegiate standpoint, it's going to be fascinating to kind of see the ripple effect over the last couple of years as the rev share comes into place. And I think the college game and the Sunday game become more and more intertwined.
Coop, I agree with you on so much of what you just said. I do think that they are going to probably push the envelope farther than many others have. And I think the interesting thing here is that they're talking about it. You and I know there have been schools out there that have tried to kind of go this route, but they don't really want everybody else to copy what they're doing. So it hasn't been quite as loud publicly. Obviously, Lane Kiffin has tried to do a little bit more of this, but they'll certainly push the envelope farther. I think the question becomes, the NFL still from a player salary and structure standpoint is way more structured and defined. And we can say that currently, okay, now we have everybody's got kind of the same rev share from the House case, or at least we think. But ultimately, like, there will be teams this year that probably exceed House plus extraneous NIL spending, like exceed 30 million. And so college is closer to a salary game, closer to a solved game than it was before. But I still think it is a bit further off from the NFL, right? You don't have the multi-year contracts that are actually enforceable like you do in the NFL. You don't have the draft. Like, Carolina finished the season poorly. They don't get a higher draft pick. College football is make it, take it. So if you're good, you generally stay good. And if you're not, it is harder to climb up. But I'm fascinated to see, like, can they uncover some of these diamonds in the rough? And then will Carolina pay up for it? Because, again, it's not a true salary cap sport like the NFL where these guys are coming from.
I guess that's my biggest question, right? If it was as black and white as the NFL, just transactional, you would say, okay, this makes a lot of sense. The biggest element to the Bill Belichick hire that I don't really understand yet is how are they going to navigate the high school process? And the other part about this that I find fascinating, is Bill Belichick going to be involved in these visits? What does that look like, just in terms of, like, all right, how much bandwidth does he actually have, and how much interest does he actually have to be involved in these type of things? Or does Bill Belichick have enough cachet to say, ultimately, at the end of the day, listen, you have an opportunity to be developed by the greatest coach of all time. Who else can say that? That's the pitch. Here's the dollar amount, sign on the dotted line, and away we go. And is it going to be that simple? But the thing that has stood out to me over the last week or so, I was in Mobile for the Alabama-Mississippi All-Star game. I asked Tristan Norman, who has signed with Texas A&M as a receiver this year in the 2025 cycle. I said, hey, what are your thoughts on the Bill Belichick hire? He said, who? And you think of the last Super Bowl that Bill Belichick won, these kids were 12 years old, right? So this is not like a comparable to Deion Sanders or any type of way. I think there's a huge educational gap and component to this Bill Belichick hire that North Carolina has to be acutely aware of. Like, the marketing machine in Chapel Hill has got to be going 24/7, 365. I think people understand who he is and what he brings to the table. But the element of recruiting these guys in the society that we have now created in college football, that's nonstop too, right? I mean, these guys, they demand a lot of attention. That's the part to me that is still kind of the hovering question that I don't know how to answer if you're a North Carolina fan wondering how Bill Belichick's going to do with that element of college football.
Totally agree. Coop, every year I shoot this little TikTok, and it's, here's how old this kid was the last time, like, your favorite team had a Heisman winner or won the national title. Like here was good. Here's who was good when he was in fifth grade. Here's, like, when he was in eighth grade, here's who was winning. And it makes me feel so old every year. Like, I remember, from your neck of the woods, I was talking to Jamar Chase. He didn't know who Peter Warrick was. I was like, dang, like, okay, like that was just kind of shocking, back when Jamar was in high school. I'm also interested strategy-wise. Like, Carolina is not, like, fully a Goliath, but they're not really a David school either, right? Like, are they going to try to run, like, some system that you could run at, like, a Georgia or an Oregon where you really can get the best players out there? Or are you going to go something a little more college-y to maybe overcome some of the deficits in terms of just general talent that you can get? Obviously, Belichick's used to being in the NFL. They all run very similar things in the NFL because of the transient nature of the free agent market and, like, the short, nature of all these guys' careers, which is, that part is very similar to what we have now because guys just bounce team to team every single year. But do we know what they're going to run yet? This is kind of curious.
No, I don't know. And that's kind of the interesting point. Scott Turner, according to Inside Carolina at 24/7 Sports, it seems like Scott Turner, who is the interim OC at Las Vegas Raiders, guy that I worked with during my time in Michigan, the son of Norv Turner, a guy that's been around. From what I've heard, that's the guy that they're targeting. Obviously, nothing official on that. So I'm curious about that as well. And acclimating to the calendar, we just talked to Eric Rivers, how important it is in his decision to know who the quarterback's going to be, right? So the rest of these components can't fall into place as well. But I'm interested, because I've been pretty convicted on this, and I kind of feel like I'm an island. I think North Carolina is a top 16, 17, 18 type of job in the country. I mean, you look at the ACC right now, Clemson. You and I think about a year ago, had a pretty in-depth talk about Clemson, which way that they were trending. And although they'll be in the playoffs, you could say, are they any closer to a national championship than they were a year ago, right? Look at the ACC, look at Florida State, major rebuild that they're going to have. What does Miami look like with Cam Ward? And then you have SMU coming from the group of 5 in their first year. That makes the ACC championship. It makes this conference so much more appealing. And then from a recruiting standpoint, you have the Carolinas, South Carolina doing a tremendous job there. But you can get into Georgia, Florida as well. You heard Michael Lombardi talking about he wants to make North Carolina a national brand. And if you look at it through the basketball lens and you look at it through the Jordan lens, it makes a lot of sense that they would do that. Now, that's the way college football is heading. I think this can be one of the better jobs in the country. The fit here in terms of a 72-year-old Bill Belichick getting the most out of it remains to be seen, but it's fascinating nonetheless.
Completely agree. I mean, like Coop, we had that graphic on the screen. They go 8-4, 6-7, 9-5, 8-5, 4 consecutive years up until this year with back-to-back first-round draft picks. Like that kind of says a lot to me. It's like, okay, there is still a lot of potential to be unlocked here, but also, we're making bowls somewhat comfortably with first-round quarterbacks, so that there's a lot to be done as well. And I wonder if Mac Brown had not had those first-rounders, which, look, he recruited them, he signed them, he gets the credit for doing so. Would they have made this change maybe a lot earlier? Because there were other elements about that team you'd watch, and it was kind of concerning and frustrating at times, like some of the toughness, some of the mental errors that they would make year after year. And that's college ball, they're college kids. But at a certain point, it's like, okay, this is a bit much here. I think Carolina, you said 16th. I don't know if I can get there, but I think they're solidly a top 25 job for sure. And I think if you told me top 20, I probably wouldn't push back on that, especially if they do have that NIL commitment to football that they make to basketball.
All right, let's take a look at their schedule in 2025 here. I mean, you talk about Mac Brown, 44-33 in 6 seasons with the Tar Heels. We talked about that 9-win season as well. I mean, but I just felt like there was a lot of food left on the table. And obviously, I don't know everything under the hood. But you think about North Carolina getting the most out of it. Obviously, Bill Belichick getting a $20, or excuse me, a lot more than $20, $20 million investment there from the financial fund in the NIL. You look at the schedule next year, but in your eyes, what's a successful season for North Carolina? And we can call it the free agency period or the transfer portal. A lot of work to be done and a lot of answers a lot of questions remain and answers that Bill Belichick still needs to come up with. But what does a successful season for 72-year-old Bill Belichick look like?
I would say probably in year one, depending on who they go get in the portal, obviously, which we're going to be following here on the 105 throughout the offseason. I would set it baseline like 8-4 regular season. I do like to get TCU early. TCU in back-to-back years has not come out of the gate ready. Like they almost lost to Stanford this year, which was kind of shameful with how bad Stanford was. And in the prior year, Colorado blitzed them pretty good there in Fort Worth. So that as an opener is actually probably kind of favorable if you look at how Sonny Dykes has had his teams prepared in that week 0 scenario. At UCF is certainly winnable. They're probably favored in 5 or 6 conference games here. Most likely an underdog to Clemson. At NC State's always kind of challenging. Out Cal can be tricky, but Duke, Stanford, Virginia, Syracuse, Wake. There are a lot of names in the ACC that I would kind of not want to play compared to those guys. So this is a nice schedule to get off on the right foot.
Right. I'm thinking 7 wins. I think that's very obtainable for Bill Belichick in year one. I think that's kind of where you want. And if they surprise some people 8-9, look out, just in terms of what they would be able to really kind of turn that into from a roster management standpoint. But I'll give you a couple names and then we'll go to break here. Luke Kromanoki's still out there. Mendoza from Cal. We talked about Malik Murphy, Bo Prabula, Justin Martin from UCLA, Matthew Sluka in Lonergan, Dylan Lonergan from Alabama. There's some names out there right now that I think could be good plug and play guys, give you a Band-Aid or a bridge for 1 to 2 years for Bill Belichick. So we'll see how it shakes out. They need a quarterback there in Chapel Hill. Guys, stick around. Speaking of the portal, as a portal king returned, Lane Kiffin. We'll talk about him next. Welcome back to the 105. In case you haven't heard, the portal is hot. The portal is jumping. But every night, I think I'm getting ready to go to bed. Get in bed comfortable around 8:30, and then something else happens, and we got names flying every single day. But I am enjoying that. And the good thing about this, Bud, is you get to watch a lot of tape. You get the pulse on the high school side. You get the pulse on the college side as well. And guess what? Nothing's changed with Ole Miss in terms of what they're doing in the transfer portal. The transfer portal king is back, self-proclaimed. Lane Kiffin, Ole Miss, the Rebels, they're number one in the country right now. And you think about the work that they're doing, 4 top 65 prospects, according to 24/7 Sports. But it's SEC on SEC crime here when you look at some of the guys that they're bringing over. They're bringing over Patrick Kudus from Arkansas, along with Luke Haz, along with Braxton, the cornerback, as well. They bring Deshaun Womack from LSU, and then Princewell Umanmielen from Nebraska. This is a loaded class already. It is still very early, but Ole Miss, Bud, really just looking like one of those teams. They seem a year ahead of everybody else just in terms of their process and their execution. I know it's early in the transfer portal, but these guys that they're bringing over, these aren't just, solid plug and play, let's get out of the year with a Band-Aid rotational starter. These are impact, winnable plus guys. So I want to get your take on, one, what it means for Ole Miss, and then the other side of this, what's it mean for Arkansas and Sam Pittman?
So for Ole Miss, I think it means that you have a chance to continue to play at like a borderline national championship contender level, which is really, if you look at the analytics, Coop, that's kind of what they played like this year. Now, they choked against Kentucky, and obviously they lost the game against Florida, and the games on the field and the results have to matter. But like a down-to-down basis, success rate, explosiveness basis, all that kind of stuff, they really were one of the best teams in the country. They just had some games where they really kind of flubbed it. But I think this talent acquisition model they have allows them to keep having another bite at the apple. And there is, I don't think it's like a Los Angeles Dodgers feeling of inevitability with them, because there's more good teams in college football than there are, maybe in Major League Baseball. And they don't have such an overwhelming talent advantage like the Dodgers did that you kind of knew eventually they'd go ahead and get a ring. But, man, if they just keep doing like this, they're going to keep playing at the high level. They're going to sneak in. They're going to beat somebody maybe like traditionally we think they shouldn't, and they're probably going to win a title at some point if they keep acquiring talent at this rate. For Arkansas, that stinks, man. Like you didn't fire Sam Pittman. You would think you had a lot of NIL money to throw around because you didn't have to pay that buyout. And like I've said it on our show before, like Arkansas, wouldn't they be happier in the Big 12? Like, it's cool we can wave the SEC flag, but they never win anything. In my lifetime, yours, probably your folks, like they just, it's more Arkansas, man.
What do you think Arkansas is like realistically in the SEC, the portal era? Like, what is their ceiling there? And let's call it not under Sam Pittman, but let's say they go out, they get the right guy, whoever that is, fits Arkansas to a T. Let's call it a John Summerall, right? A home run hire there. What do you think Arkansas could do in the SEC? Because I actually think with the right push, right vision, and I'm one of those guys. I'm an optimist, just like North Carolina. But I think Arkansas can be one of those teams that can win 8-9 games a year in the SEC and potentially challenge, one every 3 or one every 4 years.
I think you got to think about it from like a control your controllable standpoint, right? So if you're operating at peak efficiency in Fayetteville, but also, so is LSU, A&M, Texas, Auburn, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, Tennessee, probably forgetting another big one here that I shouldn't be. But I mean, Coop already, that's 9 I just named off. So I think if you absolutely crush it at Arkansas, you still need a lot of help from everybody else, just because I think the ability to get talent there. I didn't say Ole Miss. We just did a whole segment on Ole Miss, how they're rating Arkansas's roster right now for some of their best players. I really like Braxton, by the way. That Arkansas pass defense fell apart when he was out. Like, go watch a couple of those games that he missed. They did not have anybody else who could really run like he could. But I mean, if you get a special coach, but Petrino had something going there until, like the motorcycle thing. So I think it is possible for them to, rise up and be better than a bottom half team, but not much better to me than a bottom half team, at least historically, resource wise, you'd think they'd be, because they have a lot of the big names connected to it. But I know their athletic director said, like, hey, these guys can't carry, all of our NIL stuff all the time. But if they get a little bit of that Calipari basketball style stuff over to football, maybe things can get turned around.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see what happens with Arkansas. How much longer is the leash for Sam Pittman? I can't imagine too much longer. Let's stick in the SEC here. As you see the 24/7 Sports Transfer Portal team rankings, LSU at number 2. Bud, you and I on the Transfer Portal show, we're talking about how pivotal of a year it would be for LSU, and I find this kind of fascinating when you look at LSU. I think the first 2 years under Brian Kelly, I think the major mistake that he made are the hires that he made on the defensive side of the ball. And that starts with Matt House, the rest of the staff there. And he's done a good job of undoing that. Now, he should get the criticism for executing that in the first place, but he should get some credit for owning a mistake, turning it around, going to get guys like Blake Baker, the defensive coordinator, Corey Raymond, defensive backs coach, Bo Davis. And another part of that was Austin Thomas, who they brought over from Ole Miss, who had been at LSU before. To me, I know it's early. LSU right now with the number 2 ranked portal class. So far, so good, but I like what they're doing. I love this Jack Pyburn kid that they bring over from Florida. I think he's an ideal replacement for Braden Swinson. They bring over Michael Van Buren, young, talented freshman who had to play a little bit early at Mississippi State. I actually thought he did an okay job there. He kind of fills in Bryce Underwood's spot. Now you got a guy that can sit for a year behind Garrett Nussmeier. Bauer Sharp by way of Oklahoma, another guy that I think will do well. Berrien Brown, Jakeem Jackson, Jamari Butler. 6 quality pieces so far for LSU. They're not done. Looks like they're in it for Braylon Moore, the center out of Virginia Tech. They're going to be aggressive on the offensive line. Mason Murphy, another guy from USC. LSU's got a tightrope a little bit here, but the way that they're executing right now, if you're an LSU fan, I think this is about as much as you could ask for.
I think the word here is better late than never. Right? On the portal show, we were like, hey, you got a pretty unique opportunity here with what you had on that 2024 roster, especially with that offensive line. If you could actually go out and attack the portal a little bit better and be a little more ready to go last year and bring in some more pieces, maybe LSU's a team that could have snuck into the playoff. But like that's in the past. Now we got to fix the now. And I agree with you. I like a lot of these pieces that they're bringing in. If what Pyburn was asking for Florida is legit, then I understand Florida letting him walk. But I agree with you on the fit of him for LSU. I was not real high on Colin Hurley nor Ricky Collins, the 2 most recent high school signees for LSU. But I think Van Buren, that's kind of a sneaky good move because you're going to get 1 more year of Nussmeier, and you got a guy who already has SEC experience. You've seen him on a big stage. You could say, hey, maybe some of these teams were taking it easy on Mississippi State, or not taking it easy, but like not focusing on them, maybe quite as much as they would a better quality opponent. And I think that's fair, but he still performed admirably in some pretty difficult situations. So having him in your system another year to develop, that's kind of an old school move, like having a guy ready to go and have him sit for a year. So I like that move as well.
Thinking ahead, I like that. The other thing that I think about with LSU, Bryce Underwood leaves, goes to Michigan, frees up a bunch of cap space. Jakeem Stewart, you had probably $1 million plus set to the side for the big man out of New Orleans. He goes to USC. All of a sudden, LSU is probably sitting on $2.5 million in cash that they expected to have allocated for somebody else. And if you turn that into a starting corner, a starting edge, Berrien Brown at receiver, I mean, you're feeling pretty good there, right? I mean, that's a nice little player swap. Obviously, you'd like to have the number 1 player in the country and your quarterback of the future. But with Nussmeier coming back, I think it makes it a little bit easier to swallow there. So Texas Tech, I want to talk about them. Big 12 team. We're talking about which of these teams are kind of standing out. Texas Tech in the top 5. And I know it's early, man, but I like what they're doing. Hunter Zambrano, I love this kid out of Illinois State. They bring over Bryce Pollock from Mississippi State, Virgil out of Miami, Ohio, Colin Wisniewski out of North Dakota State, the safety who was banged up, was an FCS All-American, and then Gil Howard, the defensive lineman from Northern Illinois, and then Dante Balfour from Charlotte. I mean, you watch all these guys. These are all quality starters for Texas Tech and Joey McGuire. They have been super aggressive along with Minnesota. But, man, I tell you what, this element of talent acquisitions got me fired up because you look at teams like Texas Tech, even with these 7 guys, man, it's going to make them a lot better.
Much better. Also, I like Reggie Virgil, the kid out of Miami, Ohio. I watch a lot of Mac Balks. We kind of make a segment out of it on Cover 3. And that kid, he can play, man. Like these guys are not maybe first-round NFL picks, although maybe they will be. We'll see. But I think a lot of the guys are like really proven, make that roster better. And Tech is a team that I think I'll be fairly high on entering 25 because from very early on, they got really crushed by injuries on the defensive side of the ball. Not that their defense was great anyway, but It went from like, to like, oh, kind of unplayably bad at times, mainly due to injury. And they're going to get some of those guys back this year. So you actually see a lot of supplementation here on the offensive side of the ball, which is interesting. And maybe the improvement that'll come on the defense is not totally via the portal. Maybe it's just through health and getting those guys back on your roster, guys that, in some cases you were pretty high on to enter the season.
All right, stick around, guys. We got final thoughts with Bud Elliott coming up next. Welcome back to the 105. Bud, you and I were talking earlier how relentless that college football calendar is. And guess what? It got another casualty as Bo Prabula, the backup quarterback for Penn State, jumped in the transfer portal yesterday. And the timing of it, well, interesting. Penn State, they'll host this weekend SMU at Happy Valley. And you think about that, Bo Prabula, not just your ordinary backup, Bud. This guy had packages in Andy Kotelnicki's offense. So you wonder how that kind of factors into it for Penn State in SMU. But nonetheless, just your thoughts, because this is kind of the first of its kind that we've seen in terms of, I would say, a pretty significant defection right before college football playoff time.
Sure, Coop. I actually have a lot of thoughts here. So, I totally understand the player saying, like, I want to be the guy somewhere. And obviously, I'm not going to be the guy here. I'm more of like a gadget quarterback for a program the level of Penn State. I'm probably going to have to drop down a bit and go to a little bit lesser program if I want to get a shot at the full-time job. And to me, it's sad that they couldn't figure out some kind of arrangement like, hey, man, you can do your transfer portal process, but also you can continue to be kind of our package, gadget, change-up quarterback here as we try to make a playoff run. Like, I feel like this guy, has been a pretty good team player from what I've heard. But at the same time, I also understand James Franklin. If that's his policy, like, hey, when you're in the portal, you go. A lot of coaches have that policy. So does it make sense to make exceptions for a guy like Prabula? I kind of think it does, simply because, like, it's not like you're losing your future starter, man. Like, this guy wasn't going to win the job for you. He's just a kind of an important role player piece. And I think, like, after he helps you in the playoff, you wish him well. Like, hey, man, awesome. Like, go find a starting job somewhere. It's just kind of sad that, like, this is kind of what it's come to. And I hate this calendar.
Yeah, they love him too. I mean, I've heard nothing but rave reviews about Bo Prabula, the type of teammate he is. I think it's hard from the player's standpoint. He's got to go find a spot. Liability standpoint as well. Teams are making decisions. I think he noticed pretty quickly. I think he would rather stay with them throughout the playoff run, but obviously the calendar forcing him to jump in early. But the other thing that I wanted to talk to you about, obviously you're very in the know when it comes to Florida State. About this move, head coach Mike Norvell donating $4.5 million of his own money to the Seminoles Boosters Club, trying to get that thing going a little bit. Florida State has been eerily quiet so far in the transfer portal. What do you think about this move?
So last year he got a raise to $10 million after going 13-0, and they lost the Orange Bowl, got snubbed for the playoff. This year they went 2-10. So not quite a $10 million performance from Mike Norvell and his staff this year. I think it's a bit of a head nod and like a kind of an act of goodwill. Hey, look, I get it. We're asking you guys to donate more money than ever before. I'm going to reach in my own wallet and get it started off with $4.5 million. That's $4.5 million right now. It's not, like spread over 5 or 6 years. So I think it's a good gesture on his part. And probably if things work out, maybe you look back and say, yeah, like that definitely garnered some goodwill from the fans there to contribute to the rev share program.
All right, Bud, last question for you. One big prediction for the college football playoffs this weekend.
Oh, okay. I think Indiana Notre Dame is going to be awesome in the snow. I think the Hoosiers keep it close for a while.
All right. I like that. And tell you what, two teams from Indiana, you got to be fired up about that. College football, the first ever college football playoffs in a format. We're ready for it. Guys, we appreciate you watching. Just a reminder, you can find the 105 every Monday and Wednesday. Monday, you can find us right here on CBS Sports Network at 2 o'clock Eastern Time. Wednesday, you can find us at 1 o'clock Eastern Time and wherever you find your podcasts. Also, Bud Elliott, we appreciate you joining us. Make sure to subscribe and like to the Cover 3. For Bud Elliott, I'm Cooper Patagna. Appreciate you watching. Have a great rest of your week.